This is Engage, the Delta Pilots podcast. My name's Ryan Argenta. I'm your host. I am a Seattle 330 FO and a volunteer at the MEC Communications Committee. Today we've got a big show ahead of us. We've got the MEC Chairman Jason Ambrosi, and we've also got the Negotiating Committee Chairman Chad Smith. We just concluded our first week of negotiations. We've got a lot to cover. You've got questions. I want answers. Here we go. Jason, welcome to the show. Here's where we want to go. The pilot group in general feels that there's been a pause button hit, right? A gap in the past 2 years. So let me set the table. Let me set the stage. Where do we stand and where do we go from here? So roughly 2 years ago, this is spring of 2019. The economy is stable. Delta is killing it as far as economics go, as far as the business model goes. And the negotiations began roughly, 7-8 months ahead of our amendable date of December of 2019. So then we go into the summer of 2019, which is what management dubbed the summer they ran the operation too hot. We ran into staffing shortages through the summer, continuing to negotiate through the fall, and in the winter, right, January of 2020, little whisperings of COVID are starting to happen, but nothing major. The company triggers the National Mediation Board, right, for a mediator to help. And we understand it's a joint effort, but Delta kind of brought it up. Then we move into February of 2020, and we have the largest profit-sharing payout in the history of Delta Airlines. And as the New York Times reported, it's in the history of the aviation industry, right? So things are very good for the Delta pilots and the company. And then a month later, in March 2020, we're at a near ground stop because of COVID. So now negotiations end up being halted. We go through furlough prevention, working with the company for COVID measures, all kinds of things to help the company through this COVID pandemic, which is a lot of uncertainty. And get through the summer. About a year later, start emerging from the big pandemic, right? We're still in it. Travel and economic recovery are leading up to a large increase in bookings over the holidays. And then we run into Omicron variant. So as we just saw, got through the holiday season, a little bit difficult for the company, very difficult for the pilots and other employees, some failures there. And so that triggers from staffing shortages, Omicron, limp through the holidays, and we actually get a nominal one-time special profit sharing for profits made during the third and fourth quarter of the year. And boom, January 18th, we restart negotiations with the company. Where do we stand? Where do we go from here?
Well, that's a lot there, Ryan. Thank you. Again, thanks for hosting us today, and thanks, Chad, for joining us. State of the Union. Your union is strong. Your elected representatives, your administration, committee structure, and the negotiating committee are all marching in the same direction and all have the same goals of achieving an industry-leading agreement that you, our membership, can be proud of. Obviously, the MEC is a political body. There are differences of opinion, but day in and day out, we all are unified in reaching the goal of the best contract we can deliver for the Delta pilots. It has been a rough couple years. COVID hit us. We were a year into Section 6, not a lot of progress, as you said. We were at an MEC meeting when it started to hit. We were getting briefed on negotiations, how the progress was going, what we could expect at the table, and just news was dribbling out more and more day by day at that meeting. And at that meeting, we knew this was something we were going to have to tackle, but neither of us, I don't think Chad or myself, thought that the following week we'd be discussing a COVID LOA for pay protection for our pilots. So this unraveled very fast. Things developed very fast. Obviously, we pushed pause on Section 6, negotiating a contract while the company is losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day, week, month. It wasn't the right idea. We pressed the pause button with mutual agreement with the company. And as you said, January 18th, we went back to the table with the company. So we did negotiate several things. Chad and his team did a great job of negotiating side letters of agreement, MOUs, Really proud of our COVID pay incentive. It was definitely industry leading, ensuring guys and gals were pay protected for trips missed, as well as incentive for those that chose to do it on their off days. But we're ready. We've got our pilots had their backpacks on for the entirety of COVID, carrying our passengers and crew members safely from destination, flying records amount of overtime to support this company. So it's our time. The pilots really worked their tails off throughout this pandemic to make Delta number one in the recovery. So now it's time for us to have a contract that reflects our position as number one in the industry. Chad, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks, Ryan, for having me. I'll just add from a negotiating standpoint that once March of 2020 hit and the COVID crisis came full force, we didn't just stop working. We switched from a negotiating mode to more of a triage mode throughout the beginning of the pandemic, and then we morphed into a CARES Act kind of mode to negotiate some things that went along with the CARES Act. And then finally, we're jumping back in just last week into actual Contract 19 negotiations.
I think that was a good recap, a good State of the Union, so to say, on an informal level. I want to bring up some common concerns from the pilot group, and you touched on a few of them, but let's get dirty here. So rotation construction, reroutes, running the operation hot, pilot staffing. The pilots are fatigued, not just in duty day, right? They're fatigued with the process, the system being overworked, and they're frankly fatigued of empty promises and some issues from management. So how do you, as the MEC chairman, how do you bridge those gaps? How do you take the pilot feedback and make it a substantive change in these negotiations or moving forward? How do you hold the company's feet to the fire?
That's an excellent question. In short, it's contractual language. Unfortunately, right now we don't have PWA language that ensures schedule quality. We do have a rotation construction committee which makes suggestions to the company. However, it doesn't have any binding language for them. So your MEC is directed that we seek that in Section 6, some kind of language that guarantees us the ability to ensure rotation quality. That doesn't help us today, though, does it? So our rotations are bad. We hear from you, our pilots, on the quality of our trips. How did we get here? A brief history. Pandemic hit. It was tough. Chad and his team did a great job of negotiating an early out plan that 1,800 pilots left, a lot of people on leaves. So the recovery is climbing so fast that we don't have enough pilots now. So they're trying to maximize revenue by every block hour, building the schedule, relying on pilots to pick up overtime. So that's just going to run the operation hot, and the schedule quality is not going to be there. So what can you do? Keep voicing your concerns. Let the company know it's on staff. There are resources available to you. The iPad resources folder, we still have a lot of line pilots that don't realize that we have a folder in AeroDocs with all ALPA information in it. We've been publishing fatigue-related information. It makes it easier now if you are fatigued, to make that tough call to call in fatigued. That's important. So what can we do today? We talked a little bit about it. Keep showing your frustration. Your MEC unanimously voted to give the company a 90-day clock to improve rotation quality. Well, that 90 days came and went without a substantive increase in quality of our rotations. So the MEC is going to picket. We ask that you come out and stand shoulder to shoulder with your MEC leadership, negotiating committee, elected representatives, and picket in March over the quality of our rotations and our return to Section 6. The company needs to know the frustrations that you share regarding our rotation quality.
So come to Atlanta during the MEC meeting in March and show your support, is what I'm hearing. Okay. I want to touch on a couple things, but Chad, go ahead and interject.
Just a couple of things to add. You mentioned the VOP earlier. 1,804 pilots took it. That left us pretty short-staffed with regard to how quickly the travel came back in the industry. There is help on the way for that. A subsequent LOA, 2004, tried to address some of the chronic short staffing that we experience here at the airline, and has reset the targeted line value to a different framework. From 75 to 80 hours where it is in January, it will shift over to 73 to 78 hours in February. So that requires more pilots, generally speaking, on the line, which should help alleviate some of the extra flying that everybody's having to do to help recover the airline. So picking up with MOU 2002 and improvements to the Fitness Review Board, very noteworthy. Pay is no longer a factor in these events. Previously, pay would get submitted to the chief pilot. The chief pilot would decide whether or not a pilot who called in fatigue would get paid. Then it could get escalated to the Fitness Review Board, where the Fitness Review Board would decide whether the pilot would get paid or not. Finally, fast forward to today, a pilot is going to get paid one way or the other. A pilot's going to get paid for calling in fatigued. So that should be removed from an equation that you're trying to find the answer to while you're tired. When you're tired, you're not making good decisions anyway, and you're probably accounting for pay more than you probably should. No longer necessary. Extensions. Extensions is another improvement to this. FAR 117's intent was for extensions to be a joint decision. The pilot and the company both mutually decide that the pilot will extend. That was the original intent of FAR 117. We sort of drifted away from that with our interpretation of fitness review and fatigue review. No longer. You do not have to extend anymore. You don't have to have a reason why, and there is no paperwork to fill out. So if you're tired and the extension pops up, you don't have to extend. And there's no reason required. You don't have to explain why. Finally, and this is what I kind of wanted to emphasize most, if you're tired out there, it's an individual decision. If the captain's on the last leg home and you are the newest pilot on the seniority list and you are tired, you are compelled by FARs to make that fatigue decision. If you are the number one pilot on the list and have never called in fatigue a day in your life, but for some reason on this particular trip, you feel as if your judgment is impaired due to fatigue, you need to make that call as well. Just a couple of things I wanted to bring up since we're talking about how much our pilots are working these days.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I do want to say that that's going to be an upcoming podcast. We're going to talk fatigue, scheduling, all of that stuff. Because frankly, if you're a new hire, we have new hires that are 2 and 3 weeks old. You have no idea of LOA 2001, 2004, and all that stuff is great. I want to go back to Jason for a second because you said to make substantial changes in, let's say, rotation construction and in reroutes, right? We've all been subject to the optimizer. Now they have an optimizer for specific aircraft and specific fleets. So my question is, you gave them 90 days, the company 90 days to change things, right? And John Lauder in his memo, he recognized that. He said, hey, we understand we're making some changes. Wouldn't it be easy to take an 11-hour minimum layover and just make it 13?
It seems easy, but it's not. Merely making an 11-hour layover a minimum of a 13-hour layover, as you suggest, might have unintended consequences of now those are 30-plus hour layovers. So everything has a reaction. So the company is trying to do a lot with a little. They're trying to maximize efficiency. They put all the flying into this fancy machine that they spend a lot of money on, and it produces schedules. And they try to maximize the efficiency. They can tweak dials and knobs on that optimizer to make our lives a little better, but it makes things less efficiency in their mind. So we're trying to find that ground where there's a middle ground there. For example, building more buffers. We advocate for more buffers so that when there is an IROP, things don't seem to go as fast sideways. They'll maximize efficiency in the pre-month. However, when you do a post-month forensic, it costs them significantly more, maybe even double, to operate that same schedule. So we advocate for some sort of a buffer in there. It's not, Ryan, as simple as just having more credit, because our teams have studied that, because then that credit may affect certain things. So it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. Our scheduling committee, our negotiating committee, all the subject matter experts are diving into this, and it'll be tackled at the table in Section 6.
Okay, so is it fair to say that in the interim, in the meantime, what you need from the pilot group is to be engaged with that process, to be engaged with the rotations, to be engaged with the minimum layovers, the transportation issues, the hotel issues. And so we always say, yeah, submit an FCR, submit a DART, copy the union on it. And those are for long-term things. But for an immediate, I have a minimum layover tonight. I've already flown a red eye. I've got a minimum layover. Then I'm going to go to day flying. I'm tired. It's up to you're asking the individual pilot, the captain, and the crew to make a decision. It's unsafe to fly. We need to set the parking brake. We need to call in fatigue.
It's simple, Ryan. If you're fit to fly, then fly. If you are unfit, then don't fly. Same goes with sick. If you're well, fly. If you're sick, stay home. It seems oversimplified, but it's not. Chad, you have anything to add?
Yeah, Jason, I'll just throw one more thing in there, and I only mention it because we have so many new pilots. We're hiring about 200 pilots a month. This is an individual decision. Fatigue is individual. It is not a crew decision. So even if you're the newest pilot on property, if you're on your IOE on the first leg, and for whatever reason you just didn't get any sleep last night and you're on leg 4 or 5 today, if you need to call in fatigued without fear or repercussions.
And it's tough to do. I get it, right? You're on the road, especially you're on go home day, and it's a 3-leg day, and you say, you know what, I feel terrible, but I'm just going to push through. It's just 3 legs. I'm just going to get home, and then I don't have to deal with it. There's a lot of unknown, and again, that's why we're going to do another podcast just on fatigue and scheduling and what you can do, because a lot of people don't understand what happens when I call the duty pilot and say fatigue. Well, they're just going to deadhead me. They're going to do this. Or we'll get into that. That's for another time. But there are a lot of questions. Okay, let's talk about the NFLY provision for COVID and sick. And there's been a lot of policy changes. There's been a lot of different CDC suggestions that Delta has taken. Let's get to the bottom of NFLY, right? If you have symptoms, you go home and you get a positive COVID test, you contact your chief pilot's office via phone or email, you should be protected under letter of agreement, LOA 2004 NFLY protection, of which that sick time does not come out of your sick bank, right? So what I've experienced and what I've heard from the line is there are some issues with the chief pilot offices are now handling the NFLY provisions. They're actually acting on behalf of what used to be the nurses line. And so it seems that each chief pilot office is handling NFLY differently. They're handling symptoms differently, and they're applying the changed policy not in a unilateral way. What's your take on that? What's the bottom line here?
Well, Ryan, the bottom line is that we hadn't had much of a problem with the implementation of NFLY up until this point because the schedule was much lower than what it is right now. They needed pilots. The CDC came out with updated guidance. Now, it's not great guidance because it says you may return at 5 days, but you may still be transmitting the virus. So it's not great guidance. The schedule was being impacted by the massive numbers of pilots with COVID. So they were hoping pilots would come back at 5 days. So asking for tests, 5 days, then 7 days, none of that was ever intended in the negotiating in the LOA. The intent of the LOA is if a pilot gets COVID, tests positive, that they are pay protected through the NFLY provision for a normal recovery of COVID. That is up to the individual pilot. Only a pilot and their medical professional can decide what their length is going to take. I personally had COVID. I may or may not have been able to fly on day 6. I had a pretty speedy recovery, but there's plenty of people out there that are taking far beyond 5 days. You're absolutely right that the chief pilot's offices took over the administration of this from the nurse line because there were so many employees company-wide on it that the nurse line couldn't support it. But the chief pilots aren't medical professionals and couldn't handle the question and answer per se of what the nurse line would. So it came across a little aggressive and maybe suggesting pilots should come back to work earlier than they should have. The point is, short story is only a pilot can decide whether or not they're ready to return to work, and it's not up to someone else to make that decision for them.
Exactly, Jason. That last line first, only the pilot can decide. There is no reference to CDC guidance in LOA 2001. The CDC recommendations are for the general population. Pilots are part of the general population, but we are different. We have a first-class medical that we are responsible for exercising the privileges of. So if you have sick-like symptoms, call in sick. If you subsequently test positive for COVID, that sick time that you used will be reimbursed and you will be on NFLY until the conditions abate. If you have clogged sinuses, you have a responsibility not to exercise the privileges of your first-class medical. And that's what the intent of the LOA was, that you are compensated without using sick time for the entirety of the COVID event, including the residual symptoms.
I'm based in Salt Lake City. Big fan, great people there. The chief pilots would give you 5 days for your recovery, and then they were saying, well, on day 6 you have to test positive again, but you're sick, you can't fly. Some of these, you don't know if you have Omicron and you're in and out in 3 to 5 days with mild symptoms, or whether you have the Delta variant again. A lot of issues across the board. From the horse's mouth, from the MEC chairman, what is the bottom line? If you are sick, you don't fly. We know that. Will the MEC back you up when you have COVID and you need that NFLY?
Absolutely. If a pilot feels that they've been wronged on this issue, they should report to the representatives and us. Bottom line, we will have a pilot's back, and we are pursuing an MEC grievance on NFLY right now. As we said, there should not be a defined date, 5 days or 7 days, maybe even 10 days. It should be the normal recovery from it.
Okay. I mean, we have a lanyard that says honor your deals, right? This seems to fall into that bucket. Chad, I want to go back over to you and transition. So January 18th, we started negotiations. Tell me about that first week.
Long story short, Ryan, I think it could have gone better. It could have gone worse. How could it have gone better? I think the company could have been prepared a little bit better to talk to all 6 sections that we were dealing with. I felt like we were prepared to engage and get these 6 sections closed out. A little bit of the lower hanging fruit in terms of pilot priority, but they're still important and they're not going away. So I felt the company could have been a little more prepared to speak to a couple of those sections. How could it have gone worse? They could have done nothing at all. We did make progress on a couple of the sections. So in that respect, it wasn't a complete throwaway last Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday when we met off campus. But I would have liked to have seen things advance a little bit further than what they did last week.
Okay, so if you could have written the script, you'd like to have seen more get done. What would that more have been?
Well, the wisecrack is if I had written the script, we'd have a contract by now. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. So what could have made it better is what you're asking. It's kind of difficult to answer without, disclosing the actual table positions. So I can't go into a whole lot of detail with actual positions on the table. One of the sections we were negotiating on had originally been parked by the mediator a couple years ago. Section 8, there was some momentum built over the COVID. United actually improved their deadheading provisions. Sun Country added to their deadheading provisions. I thought that would have kind of nudged the company a little bit. The trend in the industry is up, and I would have liked to have seen them come a little bit more our way. They've been kind of planted into the ground with regard to their position. Haven't really moved a whole lot. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more movement towards us on that one. Section 11, I would have been happy with any progress in Section 11. The company's been pretty firm in their position for the last couple of passes, including 2 years ago. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more movement there. We also made progress in Section 13. I would have liked to have seen that one closed out as well. I think these are some of the lower hanging fruit with regard to the entirety of contract negotiations, and we probably shouldn't be spending as much time on this, quibbling over things that don't necessarily cost the company a whole lot of money, but are just more nagging issues over the years from our pilots, and frankly, just the right things to do in many cases.
Okay. So after resuming negotiations after nearly 2 years, and I know there's been some background work between both parties, but now you're at the table. What was the tone in that room?
Yeah, the tone really didn't change much from going from making $6 billion 2 years ago a year to marginally profitable right now, the tone really hasn't changed. And we've said this before earlier in the podcast. We knocked out 4 LOAs and 5 MOUs over the course of that 2 years. So we're pretty familiar with each other, and we're pretty familiar with, the mannerisms and the actions of both sides. We're familiar with the company. They're pretty familiar with us. So the tone really didn't change. The only thing that really changed was the content, a triage kind of situation to actually negotiating contract 2019.
So is management motivated to secure a contract with us?
Yeah, tough question. The trend isn't where I'd like it to be. I would have liked to have seen some obvious motivation on those first 3 days, but I really think it's too early to tell at this point. I think that they're ready to. I think they're motivated for a more simple negotiation, and the fact is that this negotiation, even 2 years ago, was a little bit more complex, and it's still complex to this day. I don't know if they were looking for us to be a little bit more simple in this negotiation, a little less detail-oriented. But the fact is, it's not. We are detail-oriented, and these details, that sometimes become overwhelmed by other events in previous negotiations are not going away this time. If I had to answer right now, are they motivated to get the kind of contract we're looking for? I would say no. But again, we've only had 3 days under our belt. We've got 2 full negotiating sessions of 3 days each in February. So I think that will be very telling one way or the other, is how they respond after the first week, seeing where we were, how they now respond. And if they're willing to say, okay, fine, we get it. We need to get some of these details knocked out. They're not going away. It'll be a very different answer if that's where their mindset is. If they're still stuck with the details, there's too many of them, they're going to end up being overwhelming. We can't deal with this much change in our contract all at one time. Well, then we might have some more fodder for the picketing event in March, like Jason alluded to earlier.
Okay. And you mentioned in the last episode that the timeline for getting to an agreement is in the company's hands. Why do you feel that way?
It's actually pretty simple when you look at where we are currently after nearly 3 years of talking about these items, and an additional 3 days for that matter, counting last Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So talking about 6 sections over the course of a 3-day period that are important to pilots, but not necessarily the sexy items, if you will. It's not the pay, it's not the retirement, but these are detailed items that are important to our pilots on an everyday basis. 6 sections we talked about. We closed out one that never should have been opened in the first place. We reparked a section that had been previously parked. Pretty much no movement from the company since the start of negotiations in Section 8. The other 4 are all sitting in the company's hands. We went back and forth a couple of times over the course of the last 3 days, and all 4 of them are in the company's hands. We are prepared to close those out. We are waiting for a response from the company. And in fact, pretty much the rest of the contract, well, the outstanding sections that we are not currently talking about, we are awaiting a response for the company. That's what I mean when I say that the outcome of contract 2019 and the timeline is in the company's hands. The sooner they realize that all of these issues are not going away, they're not going to be overcome by events, they're not going to be wowed away by money, the better it's going to be for everyone from a timeline perspective.
Okay. Before I go into some rumors and myths is the segment I like to call this, but I want to check in with Jason on that point.
Our pilots have high expectations. They really worked hard to support the operation and the recovery, and they have high expectations. We've conducted a follow-on survey, which actually had considerably higher participation than the original contract 2019 survey, showing our pilots are engaged. There is no COVID reset for this pilot group. You'll hear that narrative likely throughout the course of negotiations, but the expectations are high. The company has indicated to us that they are ready to negotiate an agreement on an expedited timeline. However, I don't think, in my opinion, they understand the expectations of our pilot group. So it's not so much about how fast we can get a contract, it's about getting the correct contract that our membership wants. So if it takes longer than we'd like, because honestly, I'm not going to speak for Chad, but I think both of us would like to have this Section 6 process in the rearview mirror and have our pilots making more money under better work rules sooner rather than later. But we'll take the time we need to get a contract that our pilots deserve.
Completely agree. 9 months into it, COVID hit. Fast forward 2 years, we're jumping back into negotiations, and then however long the contract will be, The actual length of this contract 2019 could encompass what would traditionally be 2 contract cycles. We are not going to skip a contract cycle. We are going to get both contract cycles into contract 2019.
And you'll back up the direction of the MEC. You'll back that up, I assume.
Absolutely. Look, the MEC is our bosses. We work for your elected union representatives. They set the direction. They set what is we're trying to achieve in this agreement. So your feedback to them, your feedback through surveys and polling, gives them the information they need to set the direction that we go and attempt to achieve.
Okay. Chad, I want to bring up the mediator. We know that Delta raised the issue of mediation first. It's kind of the parties, both sides, file a joint petition with the National Mediation Board. Some people understand the nitty-gritty of that. Some don't. Some care. Some don't. I want to ask, why did Delta bring up the subject of a mediator, A, so early in the process, and B, what advantage does that mediator play to them, and is there any advantage to the pilots?
Yeah, so why did they want to go to mediation? It's just a hunch. They gave their boilerplate answer of why they wanted to bring us closer to an agreement faster. I think they were actually just overwhelmed by our opener, both in terms of the cost and the sheer number of items. So I believe that they believed that the mediator would agree and try to lean on us a little bit. As you said, Ryan, we opened 270 days early, which is allowed per the contract. Section 28 actually compels us to file for mediation. So on March 31st of 2020, we were going to file for mediation as required by the contract regardless. Now, we went in and talked about it with the MEC when they first brought it up after the beginning of 2020 in early January. And we said, well, how much are we actually going to get done? If the company is bound and determined to file for mediation, how much will we really get done until we're compelled to do it in another 2.5 or 3 months anyway? Everything they were doing at the time was by mutual agreement. So the company simply didn't have to meet anymore until we were under mediation. The company didn't have to talk about anything they didn't want to talk about until we were under mediation. So is there an advantage to being in mediation? The MEC thought so, and we went ahead and filed the joint petition. And now the mediator controls everything. So we get to talk about some of the things we want to talk about. We have to talk about some of the things that the company wants to talk about.
And so historically, from what I understand, especially in 2019 in the early stages, there were times where you and the negotiators would show up with a proposal and the company showed up empty-handed. And they looked at they said, well, we just want to check out what you had to say, and then we'll respond to that. And there was a little bit of, I guess, hesitation or a little bit of foot dragging there. So a mediator could actually help expedite that and take note of company behavior of, hey, you didn't show up prepared on several occasions, and the union's doing all their homework and providing data and good reasons. So you need to show up in good faith as well.
Yes, she can handle that kind of situation. She's there to make sure that both sides are playing well in the sandbox together, for lack of a better phrase. Kind of a weird way to say it, but that's what she does. She mediates. It's exactly what it means. I personally am glad that she's there. Your characterization of the company's behavior is not entirely unfair. I will say in the very early days, they did show up and seemed willing to negotiate, but the potential was always there. If the direction wasn't going the way the company wanted it to go, the opportunity was there for foot dragging, for lack of a better term. I never really saw that. There might have been some of that going on, but the mediator can certainly preclude all that going forward. So I am happy that she's there to be able to witness the company's behavior and keep the game fair, play referee and keep the game fair, for lack of a better term.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time. We brought it up in the last episode. We'll bring it up again. But what do you need from the pilots? And this goes to both Jason and Chad. What do you need from us?
All right. Well, first, stay engaged. We need our pilots to stay engaged. Read what we put out. You have the ALPA folder on your iPad. I said that earlier. I'll bring that up again. We still have a good group of our pilots that don't realize all of the ALPA information is available on your iPad in the folder. Please read it. Stay engaged. If the phone rings from a New Hampshire number, answer the phone. Take the poll. We're going to continue to ongoing polling. We want to make sure that we know what the pilots want. We're not here to to think we know what you want. We want to know what you want. Give that information to your elected reps. Call your reps. Stay engaged. That's the important thing, is stay engaged. Show us your unity throughout this process.
You touched on it, Jason. I want to expand a little bit on unity, and I can't overemphasize the importance of unity. We've got a very diverse population of pilots. We've got a very senior contingent, and we've got a very junior contingent, with about a 10-year deadband in there when we went through the bankruptcy process and didn't do a whole lot of hiring. Don't let that be divisive out there. I see it on social media. I can't overemphasize that the accurate information comes from your representatives, not social media.
Somebody who I can't give proper citation, but a former ALPA volunteer once told me that social media, nothing good comes from a guy sitting in front of his keyboard at midnight. As Chad said, ALPA, the official sources are your accurate source of information. Your reps are accurate. You'll see propaganda from the company. It's not just social media. The company will put out their own narrative as well. The accurate, up-to-date information will come from your union.
You're listening to Engage. The easiest way to reach your union representatives is through DART. You can access DART on the Delta MEC website at del.alpa.org or through the ALPA app on your smartphone.
The best way to get in touch with the union is through its DART system. I don't know what that stands for. It doesn't matter. You can find it on ALPA's website. You're going to send us your questions. We're going to have the subject matter expert as a guest. We're going to read those questions on air and answer them. The plug for DART, right, Jason, is that it's monitored. So it's a system that is monitored by the executive admins. When you submit a question or a comment or complaint to a particular chairman or a committee, if you haven't been answered, if that hasn't been addressed within 24 or 72 hours, then it sends a flag to the admin and they'll make sure it gets done.
Yeah, that's essentially correct, Ryan. What happens is DART, it goes to the appropriate subject matter expert or committee, and if it hasn't been responded to, I believe it's 72 hours, then it prompts that individual again and says you have an unanswered DART, and it also flags up the hill to the full-time folks in the office, my executive administrators. So it's a lot of our volunteers fly the line. We've had these general mailboxes in the past where it would be insert committee name at alpa.org, and emails may get missed. Everybody works hard. It's maybe no fault of their own, but we had seen where maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks in the process, a pilot emails one of us and says, how come I never received a response to this? Well, it may have been that committee chairman had been flying that week and what have you, and it just got overlooked. So this adds a little layer of accountability to it, and it's a standardized process. One nice piece of it is when the subject matter expert responds to that DART, it will copy in their elected representatives. So that information now, their reps know that information was asked, and they can monitor any trends if there's something out there that's a common issue. You can use the DART process. We also have the phone, 1-800-USA-ALPA, which is always available to you on business hours. We have the after-hours support network for FAR 117 related issues. That's there all the time. In the scheduling committee, if you haven't seen it yet, we've got the ACE app, which is incredible. About half of our pilots are on the ACE app. You could submit scheduling-related issues via the ACE app. And for those that don't have the app, on the Delta Alpha website, we've got it's called the PDR, which is basically a DART, but it's designed specifically for the scheduling system.
Yeah, that's a great point. The ACE app has been money. Actually, I've used that personally. The comment on the ACE app, you have to go back into the ACE app to check if they've responded to you. You don't get any notification outside of that. Just a quick side note. Okay, Chad, speaking of questions from Pilot Group, this comes from social media, not our normal platform, but I like the question and I pulled it, right? So somebody asked, why did we decide to wait to resume negotiations if these meetings could have been held virtually all along?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. In fact, it was the subject of a data action report, the DART reports we had just got done talking about. I actually answered this question for pilots, so now all pilots will get the answer. So it's a great segue into the DART system and an earlier DART question that I received on the negotiating committee. So COVID was not a good environment to negotiate in. Losing hundreds of millions per day, it's obvious we don't want to negotiate in that environment. Then passengers started returning, and then the losses became less lossy, if you will. We weren't making money, but we were losing less money, if you will. And finally, the last quarter was profitable. Now, how did the NMB relate to all of that? Well, the agency couldn't travel and couldn't meet in person, two separate distinct things, both important, by the way. The lack of travel wasn't necessarily the issue. The issue was, because we could travel up to them, the issue was the fact that they couldn't meet in person. And under the Railway Labor Act, if the mediator cannot meet, if the mediator cannot be present, neither side is compelled to come to negotiations. So neither side is compelled to negotiate. That's the key distinction. So nobody was compelled to negotiate until the mediator could meet face to face. That took a while. In fact, just about 6 months ago, there were indications that the NMB finally could start meeting face-to-face and probably would be able to travel near the beginning of the year, which we just experienced. Enter Omicron, which threw a big wrench. So we scheduled all these negotiating sessions. We agreed to go back into negotiations, and then Omicron hit. Well, we had already decided on some dates to start negotiating. We went ahead and just kept the dates and began negotiating.
Yeah, okay. And so it was a very thorough answer to you negotiate in the best climate possible, and both parties come to the table when the time was right. And it sounds like we're in that time now. Jason Ambrosi, Chad Smith, thank you for your time. We've got Scott Bowles with the Retirement and Insurance Committee up next. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back to Engage, the Delta Pilots podcast. We're here with Scott Bowles of the Retirement and Insurance Committee. We've got our last segment here is about the Market-Based Cash Balance Plan, MBCBP. Difficult to understand, difficult to say. What's your elevator pitch for the Market-Based Cash Balance Plan? We've been hearing about this for a couple of years. It now seems close to deliverable.
Great question, Ryan. This has been a long game. We've been at this for a little over 6 years, and it's a first-class problem to have. We were trying to find a way to capture, with tax efficiency, the spill cash that Delta pilots have been generating over the 415C, big word, means the 401k limits, that we have now begun to exceed by almost 2/3 of the pilot group 2 years ago, and then absent profit sharing, a little over half our pilots last year.
Okay, so this is a first world problem for sure, right? So between the company contribution and your own personal contribution, IRS limits it. I think in 2022, it's, what's the number?
$61,000 combined contribution is the limit.
$61,000 limit. Anything after that, anything earned after that, you have to receive in cash, which would be taxable at your personal income tax rate.
Correct. So probably your highest marginal tax rate of the year. So the Market-Based Cash Balance Plan is a qualified, meaning it carries government insurance, defined benefit retirement plan that would allow that money to be captured in a tax-efficient way.
Can you explain the spill concept?
So the spill concept is any of the company contributions that you receive after you have reached the $61,000 combined contribution limit, those dollars would be placed into the Market-Based Cash Balance Plan.
And is that tax protected?
That is tax deferred until you take the money in retirement.
Okay, perfect. We heard recently there was a communication that came out that the IRS didn't want to comment or approve the plan. Why is that, and what are the pitfalls?
Well, they did not say no to the plan, nor did they say no to the optionality. They just did not answer the optionality question that we asked. So while we were hopeful they would answer it in advance or ahead of the plan actually being implemented, they chose to defer until the plan is actually applied for and the private letter ruling is part of the application process. So once that is underway, we expect them to answer, and our take on the way the regulations read is the plan is optional, and the consultants we've hired, who are absolutely the industry's best, also believe the plan carries optionality with it. So while we had hoped we'd get an answer before we started the plan, the government chose not to answer.
All right. So if I really want to get more information, if I want to geek out on this, where do I go?
I would say continue tuning into future podcasts. We'll continue to go into deeper detail as time goes on and more information is available.
Awesome. This is Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots.
Thank you for listening to Engage. Send questions or comments to the Communications Committee through DART. Subscribe for more episodes.